Hey gang, welcome back to Alien Protocols. We have a very special guest back again, Dr. Simeon Hein. He's the founder and the leader of Mount Baldy Research Institute. He's the author of Planetary Intelligence, the author of Opening Minds, A Journey of Extraordinary Encounters, Crop Circles, and Resonance. He's also the author of Black Swan Ghosts, which is a book about a collection of stories of unexplained craft, the occupants, and all sorts of really cool elements of the multiverse. Dr. Hein, thank you so much for being with us again. We were just having a really fun conversation, weren't we?
Yeah, we're having a great conversation. I want to share this a little bit with the audience, right? So
yeah, I think so. Why keep it to ourselves? I think it's a really interesting conversation. They might want to know your thoughts on it. You know, we were talking about the Chris Mellon leak and how it has really historic implications, and that other UFO researchers haven't really picked this up. It hasn't become a national story, despite the fact that the head of a UFO research group within the government, that the government is admitting exists, just quit in protest. And this leak came out with his resignation letter, some validation of the phenomena, very strong validation of the phenomena, and much more. What do you think about this stuff?
Yeah, I mean, this is a Black Swan ghost event. It's a Black Swan event because this, for so many decades, as you just pointed out to me, and it's so true, we've been looking for smoking gun evidence that the U.S. government has been studying this, that it hasn't just been something that was thought to be of non-military significance, and then projects were canceled. Project Blue Book in '69, even Hal Puthoff admitted at SSE that the government said, you know, we stopped researching it. There's nothing here. Condon report comes out right here in Boulder, Colorado, just a mile from me here. And they say, oh, there's nothing going on. And yet Hal told us right there it wasn't true. They were researching it the whole time because they knew there were really tremendous implications. And now we're finding from you in the past week or so that there was a leak of information, apparently, and not a deliberate leak. Information was shared on someone's computer that they didn't want to share, and it was briefing material for Congress. Is that right? I'm allowed to say that?
That's exactly right. The Chris Mellon leak is essentially a briefing package. It's a folder filled with the Luis Elizondo letter, so to show that he was in charge of this organization and it existed and what the parameters of this organization were, and then also a detailed account of the Tic Tac report with the backup of all the technical equipment, you know, the world's best sensors confirming this stuff is, you know, is not detectable by, you know, submarines, by sonar, by radar. If it chooses to, it can turn on and off this ability. And I mean, the briefing package is stunning. It's every kind of, you know, piece of nuts and bolts evidence that it seems like researchers have been wanting for a long, long time.
Yeah, buddy, when this starts to reach the mainstream media, it's going to have real large unintended consequences on our whole sense of really what's been going on with this whole subject area for all these years. Because obviously, every time this is researched, from Rendlesham Forest to every other major incident you can think of, they always say it didn't have military significance, right? That's what the MOD said about Rendlesham. Maybe something happened, but you're telling me, I'm just learning this in the last few minutes from you because I haven't seen these documents myself, that these vehicles they're not only cloaked sonically in water, magnetically, I would imagine,
yeah.
You know, in every possible way. They go in and out of the water, they go through our atmosphere, they go up into space, and you're saying that this is not detectable by any equipment that we have? They're totally cloaked?
Not only that, but they have the ability to do a very type of selective active jamming. When Lieutenant Fravor tried to lock his weapon system onto them, even though he had duds, he had blanks, he was requested to do it. They asked him, did you have live rounds? And he's like, no, I've got this piece of junk dud on it or whatever. I could knock it off with like a sledgehammer or something, he said, as like a pilot joke. But they told him to lock on weapon systems. And this is not the first time this kind of occurrence has happened. And so he tried to lock on the weapon systems, but the craft did active jamming, and he refused to go into the details of it because it's classified. But basically, the craft turned off the weapon system. It didn't affect the avionics. It didn't affect any other aspect. The flight controls, it didn't affect the, mapping and radar systems. Didn't do any of that. It was a very select kind of jamming. And when you think about it too, they say that these craft are a threat just by their advancement level. But that action by us initiating an offensive action and them just shutting off strictly the weapon system is a very benevolent act. I mean, what else could you do more benevolent than that? Except to allow yourself to be killed. And then it did something very interesting. If you listen to all the witnesses, including a third witness that no one is talking about. There was a female pilot that no one is talking about, and this pilot had an encounter as well too, and a very detailed encounter. But basically what happened, and Commander Fravor admits this, that when he came onto the scene, the Tic Tac kind of led him away from the saucer that was just under the water's surface. So there was a rendezvous happening between the Tic Tac and a larger saucer just under the water's surface. It had turned invisible and was going underneath as they arrived on the scene. And the Tic Tac turned to face it, and he says this, and they did a circle as he was coming down, it was coming up to meet, but the Tic Tac ended up doing something kind of like a mockingbird mother does to keep a cat away from the nest. This is just incredibly fascinating stuff. I mean, it's mind-blowing.
Wow. I have to ask you one thing about the congressional briefing. Was it going to be a selective briefing for Congress people who have security clearances, or was this for the entire Congress? I mean,
as far as we understand, it's not for the entire Congress. They are briefing groups of senators and senators at a time, different people on the intelligence committees,
right,
on different committees that have different, associations that they thought were beneficial and likely that could fund the program. So they weren't just briefing like the head of, you know what I mean? They're the most applicable senators.
It wasn't the House Ways and Means Committee. It was the people on the committee. I see. So this is briefing documents to get funding for the ATIP program. This isn't
not only
that they're doing now. We've heard Tom DeLonge say that they're going around now, continuing to talk to Congress. Is this from the past or something? This is part of the package they're currently using?
I think it's the package that they're currently using, but they've been doing this for months. They have admitted they've been doing it for months. There's information that we got that Congress and groups within Congress have already done funding, and very large allocations of funding several months ago after some of these first briefings and their own investigation, and had allocated a lot of funding. And from the pretty good, I'll call them rumors, but I think it's better than that, that this topic has gotten the most funding it's ever received previously. And I believe it's probably getting a lot of funding in different stovepipes, and it's probably getting a lot in all of them right now. And
it's just amazing, buddy, because did you listen to that interview with Kevin Day with George Knapp on Coast to Coast?
No, I didn't.
You really need to take a listen to this. This was another witness who came forward in support of Fravor. And was he his backseat pilot, I think, or something? No, he did, I forget the title. It was mission support on one of the naval ships. And he described hundreds of these UFOs that were seen over the period of a week. This is the most amazing thing. It was on Coast to Coast, and someone posted it on YouTube. I know that's against Coast to Coast policy, but it was there for a while. And I either listened through my subscription or on the YouTube channel. But what Kevin Day said, he said it was raining UFOs, because you heard that. They were dropping out of the sky, touching the water, coming back up, kind of like what you're saying as a distracting maneuver or something. No one knows what they're doing. But Kevin mentioned that there were about 20 people on 5 different ships each that were aware of these incidents. He said perhaps a total of 100 people.
Wow, that gels with the other stories that have been told too about radar picking. At one point, a group of like 30 of them tumbling from space, tumbling to an area, and then scattering different directions. Right. A group of them kind of lingered, and one went one way, and a group of them scattered other directions. And this has been a regular phenomena. They seem to be, there's a whole theory, and have a theory about different size ships with different purposes. And as you get smaller, they're more numerous, kind of like the Russian doll thing. And their purposes change as they get smaller. And they're more obvious functions as you go through each different size. And something to consider and think about, if that is true, if the numbers increase as you go smaller, and they include smaller ones in the larger ships, that there may be smaller ships flying around that could be around a 3-foot size, the size that a little bit smaller than the footage caught in Go Fast, but has been caught in many other places. There could be small 3-foot, 2-foot even craft that use this metamaterial that could be flying around closest to the surface. And we wouldn't even know, because we don't have infrared sensors like they do on the jets and the helicopters here on the ground. So who knows what's really around us? And that's a really bizarre thought too. You know, numerically, the numbers should go up as you get smaller and closer to the ground.
Yeah, and see, this fits with what I think is going on, is what we're going to find out over the upcoming years, is that we don't know where we are anymore. This is going to hit humanity in a big way, with the most unimaginable consequences. Did you realize we feel like we're the top dog on the planet? We're the top predator. We're the humans here. What happens if we find out that there's actually other beings around, creatures, entities, whatever you want to call them? We're not even saying where they're from. And they're around. You won't know they're around. They're in little craft. They're right over your house. They're over your apartment building. They're monitoring what we're doing. You can't detect them. You can't really do anything about it. You just have to get used to it. I mean, how are people going to react to this? I mean,
we're going to look at zoos a whole different way.
I mean, this is the biggest black swan event I can imagine.
This is a paradigm shift. This makes the Copernican revolution look like, you know, the ABCs.
Because that took so long to happen. You had Oresme, who suggested this idea of, you know, the heliocentric model, right? And then Copernicus comes along like 100 years later and develops it more. And then Galileo actually has a telescope, and he says, well, I think that supports Copernicus. He gets in trouble with the Vatican over this, right? And that's over 150 years or 200 years, this slow, you know, percolation of this idea that we're not the center. We're not the most important thing. And there's a universe out there, and we're just one of other planets. And now we're suggesting there are other biological entities around. For how long, we don't know. That all of this UFO stuff has been real for the whole time. Our governments haven't been telling us the truth about it, and in secret have been researching it for their own military advantage. I can't think of anything bigger than this, buddy. I just can't. This is why I stick with all these topics, because this is where it's at. This is where it's at.
You know what? This is as you point out rightly and justifiably, this is a dangerous time. And by denying the people the knowledge, the shock of the whole thing is going to be so much greater. You know, to demonize them right now, to call them a threat. And if you look at what a threat is, I don't think the actions of shutting off the weapon systems would be considered a threat. I would consider the initial actions of trying to lock on, who's the threat to who. I mean, this is really, really, really serious stuff. And if they're right under our noses, which if you're a logical person and you look at the evidence and you ignore the conspiracy theories, you ignore your preconceived notions, you just look at the facts and follow the logic train, it leads to a conclusion. As you say, we are being visited by an advanced civilization. Their presence here is so much greater than we would believe and may be able to even conceive. Their involvement in our lives could be so much deeper than we could imagine.
And it's omnipresent. It's not just a select few people or experiencers, people that occasionally have an encounter. It's something that's ongoing and hidden. And I think for the human psyche to realize, with all the technology we have, all the data gathering, all the cool stuff we have, you know, our phones and all these systems, that we're missing maybe 95% of what's going on around us, just like the dark energy and dark matter we talked about in the previous interview. Yeah. Where science, physicists, cosmologists admit we don't know what's making up 95% of the universe. The majority of it not even being matter, just a type of weird energy called dark energy. let's say we find out that we're surrounded by dark energy and dark matter. I mean, not way out there in the cosmos. I'm talking about outside your window or even inside the room. I mean, listen, I just can't, I can't imagine anything larger than this in my little monkey brain. But I like what you're saying, buddy. We need to drop our preconceived notions of what this is, because we don't know. Are they visiting us, or is there something about our consciousness that's expanding to see more of the universe than we saw before? That it's
question.
It's a two-directional process. That's why I really like what you're saying. That's why we get along, is that the conspiracy theory misses all of this. It's not somebody doing something to us. It's an evolution of the universe, us, in our universe, to realize we're in perhaps a multiverse. And if you thought you were in a universe and then realized you were in a multiverse, you'd realize you're just in one room of many rooms, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And the doors open sometimes and things come through, and it's not they're doing things to you. It's they've always been there. You just were so much in your own little bubble, you didn't know it. That's my perspective on this phenomenon, at least.
And then there's scary things that make me frightened for humanity. There's a lot of different religions and cultures around the world that will see this phenomena through those lenses. And even Luis Elizondo came out in a speech the other day and said that he had great bureaucratic difficulty with some of his superiors. And what he was really saying is, and he wouldn't say it on the air, was his boss was an evangelical Christian.
Right.
And he thought that this was an evil phenomenon. This was literally a satanic phenomenon. He's not the only one. His boss is not the only one. There are several at that executive level that have the same thoughts and beliefs. And there are many who, I look at these phenomena like you do a new animal in the rainforest. Just because it's new and I've never seen it before doesn't mean that it's evil. I shouldn't worship it. I'm not going to follow some snake oil salesman who says they really understand it. It's just another natural phenomenon. It's a natural part of our universe.
Right.
It's not demonic. It's not satanic. It's not paranormal, weird. It's none of those things. It's real world, solid, a natural part of our universe to have other brothers and sisters essentially out there. And out there doesn't just mean in our universe. It could be different time periods. It could be, there's a lot of implications to, we were talking about this before, how they seem to represent oftentimes near future technologies, something like you were saying, that we have to understand half of it for it to be a reality. So it has to fit within our framework. So we could only perceive kind of spaceships that looked just ahead of our future technologies. Before we had Zeppelins, they were airships and they would wave from the airships. Before we had rockets, they were cigar shaped with fire and smoke behind them. Before we had triangle, they had triangles, and they're affecting the experiencers in society now too. So they seem to be affecting us technologically. Would that be the action of a extraterrestrial, or would that be an action of a future human to try and increase our technological level? Or is that what they're doing at all? I mean, it's such a fascinating conjecture, but the implications of the reality of it need to be translated to society, and not in this piecemeal sort of soft disclosure. I think we need some big hits on this. I think the government needs to basically man up and say, son, you need to learn about, safe sex, or whatever. Had that real conversation with America,
This is like a birds and bees conversation that we need to have.
It really is. It's that
We're
deep.
Members of a bigger cosmological family. It's time to meet your relatives. This is we really don't know what we're dealing with, and this is kind of a soft disclosure. We were told by Targ and Putoff and anyone in the remote viewing program at SRI and the other programs that the biggest obstacle in the government were not skeptics or critics. I love skeptics and critics, buddy. I get to talk about evidence. I had one on my YouTube channel, and he was very critical and nasty for a few days about RV. All of a sudden, there was an amazing shift. He goes, you know what? He deleted his previous comments. He goes, you've said things that have made me think for a moment. I'm sorry if I was a little rude. I'm deleting my previous comments. I'm going to read the books you recommended.
It's probably because you were representing facts and he could back up.
I said, you need to look at the facts, read the best books about RV, the newest ones by Russell Targ, and there's so many great books out there about remote. I said, just read some of these first before you go shooting your mouth off, okay? And I wasn't mean about it. I was just saying, here are the facts. You're not aware of the evidence. But the skeptics are fine because we can bring up evidence. The challenge is religious fundamentalists of any religion are always the challenge to us, because their minds are built around a dogma, and they're never willing to challenge those assumptions. Any type of religion, the real issue, the real challenge to our modern planet is religions, fundamentalist religions of any type. Targum put up, and everyone said the biggest challenge, even in the 70s, were the religious fundamentalists. And I think we're going to see it again. And for those of you who are in favor of immediate disclosure, we have to have it today, now. I mean, you're not thinking through the full consequences of what it's going to do to these fundamentalists all around the world who are going to.
You know what? It's an important discussion. You can't soften it up, because the visitation is happening at an increased rate. They're allowing themselves to be seen. It's obvious that they're kind of allowing themselves to be seen. The rate and frequency and the importance of this. Maybe there's a way to incorporate, instead of attack the religious perspective, incorporate it. Because I'm also I have religious beliefs, and I know, like, I think the Pope's astronomer has said something like, if extraterrestrial life exists, it's all part of God's magnificent creation. And maybe there's a way to not to insult the dynamic nature of God's creation by saying it's so small, and to incorporate the possibility that God's creation is so big, and that these don't have to be devils. By definition, if they're from the heavens, they could be angels. And by turning the other cheek in the face of violence, they surely show Christ-like behavior. So I think there's a way to incorporate their fear, incorporate that fear, and be straightforward about it.
No, absolutely. Wasn't it Signor Balducci, the representative of the Vatican, who said that they are totally ready for this? He'd given interviews 20 years ago about this topic. He said he was a spokesman, and he said, we are ready to talk about this phenomenon. We think that everything is under, from their perspective, God's cosmos, God's creation. It's part of creation. And that's what you're saying. That's right. It's all part of it. It's a judgment and a label to label. I'm Jewish. I've talked to many different rabbis about this topic. Some of the more fundamentalist conservative ones have told me they thought it was demonic. Others thought, no, we know about this. This has been around. If you read some of the Talmud and some of the different esoteric Jewish Kabbalistic texts, that this is something we accept. So it can be incorporated in a way that it's not totally disruptive to people's worldviews. I mean, personally, I like things that are disruptive to worldviews. I think it's healthy. I think it's too easy to become complacent in your sense of what reality is. There's nothing wrong with having your worldview broken, because it'll build itself up again in a better, new way. This happened to me, as we talked about in the previous interview, with RV. It wasn't something I thought was real until I took classes in it, and all of a sudden I realized, you know what? I don't know what's going on anymore. I don't even know what I haven't been told in 23 years of school, 27 years of school. Continuous, from kindergarten to PhD. I don't know what I'm missing now. What else am I missing from this lexicon of information and data and ideas that I've been taught for 27 years? And what else am I missing? How else does it work? And that's what started me on this quest now into all these topics, which we're going to talk about in a moment, crop circles. But buddy, you're correct. Some people can't handle that very well. It doesn't matter what religion or what belief, it's just they're wedded to a very specific idea. We're going to talk about this right now about crop circles, because we've encountered people too that are so rigidly attached to one idea of what crop circles are, they become nasty, almost violent when you show them another possibility.
And this is great, because as I told you before, this is not a gotcha interview. I am a crop circle skeptic.
Right.
And I haven't done a lot of research on the topic. I've done a very minimal amount. I know a little bit about some of the stories associated with it, like funny stories too, like, men saying they walk in and they get erections and things like that. And, the more oddball stories, because of course you hear those first. But I'd like to hear more. I'd like to, convince me.
What do you actually want me to convince you of? Because
are these crop circles, are them Any real percentage of them.
Okay, let's
Any
go back.
percentage of them.
Let's go back in history.
Extraterrestrial.
Let me tell you how I got involved, the story, and what my current thinking about it is after I got involved with. This is a perfect segue to our previous interview because it came out of remote viewing. As I mentioned, I learned remote viewing from Dr. Courtney Brown at Emory University. And fair disclosure, I'm on his board of directors now for his nonprofit. They do this great stuff and put it on YouTube, educate the public about RV. It's great stuff. And I'm happy to help him with that. He gave us something called a crop circle as a target. If you know from remote viewing or the previous interview, or for those of you that are new to this, you get a hidden picture or a cue and you're supposed to describe it. The magic of RV works if you consciously don't know what the target is, right? And so you get a target, your job is to describe it as accurately as possible. It works because you don't know what you're being given to look at until the end of the session, and you can open the folder and you can see, what was in the folder. What was your target? Could be Mount Kilimanjaro, the Eiffel Tower, a famous president, a famous scene in history, and you're supposed to describe it and go beyond even what we know, to go inside, look around, things like this. It's like a magical process because it really works, is what I found out in 1996. So he gave us a picture of a crop circle, and I got some really weird stuff in this session. It just didn't add up. I got an outdoor natural area, a circular object, and energy going in and out of a circle, people being around there. Let me see if I can pull up what my first...
Did you have the actual drawing of your target?
Yeah, I do.
Wow, that's incredible. I'm, as you know, a viewer too, and you like to keep all the targets, especially the target drawings that are accurate or interesting.
Yeah, it was, this was the, if you can see that, it was this particular crop formation.
Oh, that's a very famous one where they had kind of fractal kind of nature.
The Triple Julia set from 1996. It was one of these really huge, big ones. And this is before I visited it because, let's see if I can make that a little bigger. Excuse me. I just didn't want the middle of it. You can see I had this picture of, we're going to.
And it was fractal in nature, right? It had the bigger ones and smaller, and they kind of were all in parallel.
Yeah. Can you see that?
Oh, interesting. Wow, what an interesting
This
drawing.
was my first experience of a crop formation.
Wow, interesting. You had the circle in the center, and you have the lines going out like the three. It looks like you have 2 out of the 3, maybe, of the things that go out, or maybe even 3. You could interpret that as 3 even.
Yeah, yeah, and
the waving
kind
field,
of rolling hills in the background, people around, this kind of energy going in and out.
Amazing. It's a great accuracy on that one.
That was my first experience with a crop formation, and I figured I had to go over there and figure out what these were. And luckily enough, after taking remote viewing classes, being around people, I got curious in the topic of UFOs. And I thought I should go to a UFO conference. I've met all these people who came to take classes because I became an instructor there. People who had been NASA astronauts, people that had worked with different governmental agencies. And they were telling us some pretty wild stuff about the UFO phenomena way back in 96. I said, they would say, you guys don't know half of what's going on. There's stuff on the moon. I've seen the things on the moon, structures, the whole thing.
Yep, Ingo Swann has a very famous moon structure, and yeah.
Yeah, the book he wrote, his penetration book, Question of Alien and Human Telepathy, right? And this is before I knew any of that. I just had met these people, and I thought, well, I need to learn more. I went to a UFO conference in Denver, met a guy there named Ron Russell, he gave us a lecture about crop circles and said, we don't know who's making them, we don't know what they mean, or we don't know how they're made. But I give a tour, and you're welcome to come along with me in July, and you can see them for yourself. I thought, wow, I could get feedback. Keep in mind, RV is driven by feedback. When you do a session, you want to look at some actual target data, target pictures, feedback.
You want validation. You need validation, absolutely. And especially with targets, you should always start with the regular standard targets where you can get that validation. You can see exactly what it is. Right. Then you start getting into parapsychological ones. Like the first time you accidentally get a UFO as an RV guy, you're like, whoa, that blows your mind. And it seems like you've had that with the same exact experience, but with the crop circle. That is so cool.
Yeah, so I figure I should, because in that particular session, I showed you that phase 3 drawing of energy, a circle, hills, people, energy going in and out. But what is that? So I figured, okay, I'm going to go over and get my feedback and walk around in one of these things and make my mind up. At the time, nobody knew how they were made or what they made. Now, there were some early precursors to this phenomena that go back to the 60s, the so-called Tully saucer nest, 60s and 70s. In Tully, Australia, people would see, you know, were these discs in this kind of marshy area, and there were these kind of flattened areas where the reeds would rise up and it would leave kind of like a circle. And so, and then there were times in the past in the UK, something called the mowing devil, which was back, I think, in the 1600s. There were reports of strange markings in the field and so forth. But at the time in 96, there were no witnesses to how these things could be made. So I did go over there in 1997 with Ron. And one of the first things I did encounter from people are reports that their cameras and batteries and things like that stopped working so well around crop formations. We never encountered anyone that had actually seen one being formed. There were some sketchy videos of perhaps balls of light, the Oliver Castle video of balls of light moving around, but we really didn't know. But one thing I could ascertain as a scientist is I could see that my own cameras and batteries were being affected by these circles, taking pictures of them, going in, you'd find the focusing mechanism stopped working that well. You'd find your batteries drain really quickly, things like this. I encountered this the first time, well, the first time was 97. Ron, our tour leader, put his Sony camcorder down in a formation at Danebury called the Danebury Triad. And it melted the solder joints on the inside. It didn't work again for the rest of the summer. He sent it back to Sony and they had to resolder. You know, so something like that would happen when there's a big discharge of energy.
Yeah, yeah, and that same phenomenon seems to happen a lot with CE5 groups and very high active UFO areas. That same thing about cameras not working, and certain people who have very high remote viewing accuracy oftentimes have those phenomena associated with them. So maybe there's a connection with all these. Okay, we're putting the puzzle pieces together. Okay, keep guiding us, doctor.
Yeah, and so I encountered it myself personally in 98 when the focusing mechanism stopped working a couple times on the camera. And initially we thought it might be due to static charge. We used this device, which is a field, you know, laboratory grade electrostatic voltmeter made by the Trek company. And is it Medina, New York? Your territory out there.
It is up there in the Hudsonish Valley.
Yeah, and we went around and we thought we finally had a litmus test for detecting the so-called real ones from the human-made ones. At the time, the thinking was maybe 5% of them are human-made and 95% something else. I mean, even these huge patterns, people said, well, there's not enough darkness in the British summer. There's no footprints. We don't have any evidence that people are involved. And this was all very convincing. There were so many, even architectural firms said, we can't do that in under 5 days, that sort of thing. With these crop formations, you know, would appear like overnight, right? And hold on a second, I'm gonna. They would appear overnight, and you know, just all sorts of, just the largest. I mean, all sorts of patterns of every shape and size. I'm just showing you some of the slides from my presentations. We've seen these before, all the different shapes and sizes.
Those are humongous, yeah.
Yeah. And so we thought we had a litmus test because we found that some of the ones that were man-made, we knew for sure they were man-made. There was a team of German researchers, Koch and Kyborg, who would pay the farmer every summer and make their own formation to kind of create contact with some larger intelligence. And when we measured the static charge in their formation was very low. But in some of the others, it was really high. And in our minds, the so-called unidentified ones had very high static charges, and the ones that were known to be man-made, maybe the BBC would make one or something, were all low. So on
Wow.
a sample of about 10 or 20, 30 circles, you know, from my statistical training, I thought you need a minimum of 30, you know, data points in your sample to get statistical significance. So we had 30 circles we measured.
And you had a control. You had, by nature,
We had a
you
control.
which is great. Yeah.
Other things that would happen, and apparently the real ones, were balls of light being seen, strange, you know, luminous phenomena.
Were you able to correlate this with any geomagnetic natural occurrences or geomagnetic lines of force or any of that stuff?
No, not directly. We didn't do any work like that. But I'm glad you brought that up, because occasionally people's compasses would spin around. The old, you know, physical compasses, they would start spinning, electromagnetic effect. And up until about 2000, I began to encounter more people with the cameras failing, the batteries, that we've seen it. I just saw it happen again just last August, just 1 month ago. July, the very end of July, when I was there. I have a YouTube video about it when I went into one of these, and the camera went into burst mode. I mean, you have to hold the button down to do the burst. I didn't even know about burst mode until I went into the circle, and it just started. I took the finger off, and it's going. What? Tim Cook never talked about this in one of his Apple presentations. Like an amazing mode where it just starts taking 10 frames a second, and you don't turn. It's not video. We're talking still photo mode. Well, the burst mode, I looked it up. Okay, you hold your finger down, it keeps taking pictures, 10 frames a second or something like this, right? And okay, it just did this twice, just last July in a formation at Hackpen Hill. I put the video up. It just like I've seen so many times with other circles. So it's still happening. So what happened to us finally, buddy, is some people approached us who we thought were hoaxers. They said, would you like to see one done in the daytime? It's been paid for. It's for an advertisement for internet radio. It was an R in an @ sign. And let me see if I can pull it up for you, because
I see some nice, cool crop circles behind you as well.
yeah, there's a whole bunch there. This is the one that we first saw done live in the daytime.
That must have been difficult. How many people to do that?
3. And
how long?
It was Matt Williams and crew. Matt Williams, now known for his amazing drone photography. If you look on drone, he's not the only one who does it. We spent some time with Matt last summer, and there are other people that we met who do this wonderful drone photography too, but he does that. But back then he was a circle maker. He was started out as a researcher, as he told us. They waited a long time on the hilltops at night, the so-called downs in England, waiting for something to happen, and they never saw anything. They said, maybe if we make a small one, the larger intelligence that makes the circles will answer us and make a bigger one. So they started making small ones. This is how all crop circle artists usually start. Even Doug and Dave were imitating the Tully saucer nests, because it was Doug, I believe, who came from he was an artist who had lived in Australia, and he said, can we make something that looks like the Tully saucer nests? In this case, Matt and crew found that the ones they made kind of looked okay, and it attracted a lot of attention. They just started making them bigger and bigger and bigger. And that is how Matt started, and he showed us the R. Now, when we measured the R with our static meter, there was pretty low static energy, not like we had found. But then when we moved around after a while, it started jumping up. So our theory was wrong. We found a man-made one. It was known to be man-made because we were there when they made it. And the static was high, though we initially were hoping it was going to be low, because that was our theory.
So is that part of the consciousness phenomena, or what is that part of? Is that part of humans being there raising
Well,
this?
this is what started us thinking that there's something about the formation itself that changes the energy pattern in the field. Because we could clearly see that here was a man-made formation that once we had walked around enough of it, there were areas with very high static charge compared to the field. Now you have to, and this is an important part of what makes the crop circles work, is a lot of the wheat's flattened. It's now at a 90-degree angle. The rest of it's standing, right?
Yeah.
So you have a field with a very uniform distribution. I mean, across the entire field. There's just the green part that you see, which is standing up, and then part of it's flattened, which is breaking the symmetry of the field, if you will.
Yeah, and there's very sharp, divisive lines through it to meet the artistic qualities.
Right. So that same summer, I was approached by another group that said, now you've seen one in the daytime, would you like to see one done at night? And we're not going to tell you where it's going to be. This is not legal. We could be arrested out there. I wasn't allowed to participate in it. Just supposed to watch. I guess there's no crime in England about watching someone make a crop circle. It's not like you could be charged for something for doing it. But I was out there and I did watch them. And this is what finally laid to rest the idea that, that these were not man-made, because we went out there and this is the pattern I was shown that evening.
Wow.
And they said, we're going to do this. And I thought, you can't.
In one night?
One night. Well, they did it.
How many people?
5.
Oh, 5. Yeah, numerically they can. Yeah, they worked as a team, had it planned out. Yeah.
And
but then it takes on qualities afterwards, right? Why?
I went back to that formation, and it was a little bit. I have to say, I was doing some research. I didn't go up to people and say, "Hey, I was here last night. This is man-made." I just watched, and people had. It created the static charge we had seen in the R formation. People came in and had a variety of beneficial experiences and so forth. And then it dawned on us that maybe these were all man-made, or at least mostly man-made. That in other words, it was flipped around. Instead of 5% being man-made and 95% being real, perhaps these were mostly a man-made phenomena, with about 5% being unexplained, like the Tully saucer nests, other types that look like some energy kind of just twisted the weed around in a vortex. There was one like that in Westbury a couple of years ago. We went out there and it was like the original phenomena. It just looked twisted and turned. It didn't look like anyone had interfered with it. But the thing is, it didn't seem, the big question then became this. If 95% of the ones we've been in were created by people with boards and ropes, like I saw that night at Cheryl, what explained all the batteries and cameras failing? Because there was one formation I went in 1999, the so-called Devil's Den formation at Fifield Down. And I'm going to have a YouTube video coming out about that soon, because this summer when I was there, I went back to the Devil's Den and refilmed the areas where this happened to try to make sense of the experience. But basically what we found is 3 or 4 cameras, batteries, all at the same time started to fail at the same time. Someone came in with the GPS meter, Rob Spate, who I just talked to recently on the phone. He contacted me after the longest time. I hadn't met him. I hadn't talked to him since 1999. And he said, he wanted to know what was going on. And this is the Devil's Den formation. And we were talking about it. His GPS said 14 hours of battery life. He goes in, the batteries are gone. It's hot. And I have videos. It's on YouTube. If you go to bit.ly/crop circle weirdness, I have the videos of this sort of thing happening. And I was able to record it. So
it correlates so much to experiencer phenomena all the time, electronic phenomena. And since you're saying that it's 95%, the chances are most of these are human made, and somehow the power of consciousness is doing this, what's going on here? What do you think?
Well, this is what makes it really interesting. Just to finish the Devil's Den thing, my static meter went out, and someone's camcorder, Masamaki, who we were going down that evening. In the upcoming video, I'll show you where we went and everything, because I retraced the steps. It was like he got the dirty heads indicator in a brand new, mini DV camcorder. It doesn't happen. And like after years of working with a camcorder, it's going to get dirty heads just like your cassette deck, right?
That doesn't make sense. Yeah, that's
And
weird.
so that's what you get, these weird little anomalies like the burst mode going on, dirty heads indicator, like your electronic device is in a weird field of energy where things are randomly getting touched and pushed and triggered.
So
And
is
so
it a field of energy? But
a
if it's
field
human
of
selected,
energy in man-made circles.
so is it the
Anomalous.
circle making it, or are we attracted to the location because it has energy?
That is the big question, buddy, because ever since I saw the one done at Cheryl and I talked to people, and by the way, I have to tell you something. You were mentioning before about UFO researchers not being helpful to the progress of this subject sometimes because of their conspiracy theories.
Sure, of
I
course.
encountered crop circle so-called experts who told me, Simeon, we've known they're all man-made since 1995. They had known this. I said, why don't you tell anyone? They would say, the public's not ready.
I'm not ready to know that they're fake. I
Or maybe
caramba.
these are people that put on the crop circle conferences and sell the, books and things like this. That was like a big eye opener. This is kind of like reminding me of the British opium trade in China, which is once you've got a good thing going, you don't want to interfere with the cash cow. And this was like an opiate that was being sold to people, basically that this is being made by aliens and you get the draws on the conference. Now, listen, I want to say something very clearly here. I'm not saying this is a total explanation to everything that's going on in the crop circles. What I'm saying is, as a sociologist, I found there were people that knew that many of them were man-made, but they were presenting them at the conferences in their books and in interviews as if they weren't, because it was good for their business.
Well,
they were lying. And this is very destructive to our field, to have people that know the truth but aren't telling it to the public, because you may get a run for 5 or 10 years because you keep packing your conferences and selling your books, but you're not telling the truth. What does that do to people's trust in alternative science if you have people and they admitted to me, essentially, this is what's going on.
They're doing entertainment. They're not doing research. And that's a big problem with the UFO right now, the field. There's a lot of entertainers and not as many researchers.
It was good showmanship, and it was a big break for me to break away from the crop circle community, because these are people we consider to be friends and colleagues. But as soon as I pointed out that I had seen one that was man-made, and I was really curious why man-made ones would do this, and maybe we should make a few, pay the farmer, and make some to see if we could create that effect. The circle makers called it natural magic. These circle makers that went out at night and did this without farmers' permission, and I realize the farmers get very angry about that. I've spoken to farmers many times about this. Nonetheless, they would say we experience shadow people out there, balls of light, unexplained anomalies. The night I was out there at Cheryl, there's something happened to people's watches, and they seem to have gained time. There was like more time than we should have had. One guy I spoke to said he saw triangular craft come right over his circle, a mini triangular craft about 6 feet on each leg of the triangle. Wow. And then we realized what was going on is that these crop circles were acting some sort of like a metamaterial crystalline conducting sort of device. Now I think of them as a crystalline topological insulator, which I can explain in a moment. It's a material that can be both a conductor and an insulator at the same time. It's the latest exotic material to come out of physics. But what we realized is there was something really amazing happening in the crop circles, that humans could go out, make a shape, and it would have apparently magical effects as Matt Williams called it, natural magic. And I want to point out that in Black Swan Ghosts, I'm not saying they're all made this way, because there's Luis Voves, who Ken Korczak actually mentioned. He was kind enough to review Black Swan Ghosts a couple of weeks ago. He posted a great review on Amazon, and I really appreciate it. And he posted it somewhere on his website, Top 10 Book Reviews. And
congratulations, that's very cool.
No, thanks. And he said the Luis Voves case is amazing, because this is a woman, I mentioned it last time, picking huckleberries up near Usk, Washington, and something comes flying over. They don't even know what to call it. It's like a tortoise shell with lights going around. And then some people panic. They're a mom and a son. They call the sheriff, who calls the army from Spokane, and convoys come up and seal the area off. I have her on videotape. If people go to the blackswanghost.com website, it's free. You can look at the video interviews, the witnesses that were the basis of the book. And this is quite a long interview with Louise, and Ken actually looked at the interview. And she said as the disc left, it made a whistling sound like it was pushing the air out of the way and flattened the crop. Well, not crop, meadow. Flat as a pancake, she told me. The grasses in the meadow was flat, she said, just like that. And I said, wow, what does that sound like? It sounds like a lot of these stories we heard from around the crop circles. So there is a connection between these unexplained anomalous discs and flattened wheat. I've talked to farmers that said, one from Alberta once, he came to one of my lectures at Salt Lake City. He said, you know, we had these UFO sightings, and the same summer there were a lot of flattened areas in the crop. So there is a connection between the UFO phenomena and crop circles, no doubt. But what seems to have happened, buddy, is that humans, as we do, said, hey, this is cool, let's make it better. And they started going out and making these huge formations, larger and larger, huger and huger.
Tell us about this metamaterial thing, because once you started that, you just totally blew my mind. I want to hear more about this insulator thing and that theory.
So, yes, okay, so here's the deal. I have never let up on the crop circle topic since I encountered it in '97 personally. There is something very interesting going on. And I now consider crop circles to be one of the most important discoveries of human history. It's another state of matter. Because you go out there and you create this precise crystalline shape in an insulating material, wheat, and it's electromagnetically active, maybe even active in ways we can't quite describe. That's active enough to affect our electronics, create people. Some of the videos I have on the YouTube I've uploaded are people's compasses failing, batteries failing, cameras. We've seen it every summer. I saw it last August again. It happens almost every year. And the thing is, what could it be about wheat and shapes and precise patterns that create strong electromagnetic effects? Perhaps even at a quantum level, affecting, electron spin, something like that. And this is what I've been preoccupied with for 20 years is what is it? But now that we know people make them, why are the ones that people make as real as the other ones, right?
That's the key factor. And it ties into a lot of other things. And in my brain, it ties to this whole thing. But I want to hear your thoughts on it. And we've gone an hour, so I don't want to push too long. We're going to have to do another interview for sure on crop circles and all of this stuff. But I want to get to that. This is just mind-blowing. This is mind-blowing. Yeah, well, basically, what I realized after looking at this and reading Science Magazine for all these years is that what we're talking about are quasi-crystals. Essentially, this looks just like the Cheryl Formation that I saw made back in 2000. You're dealing with quasi-crystals and metamaterials, excuse me. The metamaterial side comes from the way that the wheat is laid out in an anisotropic pattern. The grains are all pointed from the board. It's pushing the wheat down, or whatever force pushes the board. It doesn't matter. You've got all these grains of wheat that are standing up like this. And then something comes and pushes them down. They're all facing the same way, just like in a liquid crystal. A liquid crystal makes your screen work that we're all watching this on right now, that I'm doing an interview. You have these crystals that twist back and forth. When you put electric energy into a lattice work of liquid crystals, they flip and turn and show different colors, which is behind. I never even thought of that. I never even thought about how they're laid out.
It's reciprocal because the universe, what physics teaches us, is that there's lots of symmetry in the universe. So what's the symmetrical reciprocal side of that? When you take liquid crystals and you move them, it generates energy. So a lot of the energy could be generated from the fact that you've basically taken an inert material and organized it into a crystalline pattern. When I was a kid, buddy, I used to build crystal radios. There was one at Radio Shack you could get, and I was amazed. You could put the wires together on the little spring connectors, and you could hear the loudest, the strongest AM radio stations with no battery. The crystal itself was taking that signal and turning it into electricity, which you could hear with an earpiece.
The resonance of the crystal.
That the crop circles are a type of resonant crystalline device which can change energy from one frequency to another. And for some reason, humans were smart enough to figure this out, because humans are good at doing new things with materials and inventive. We're creative. We don't give ourselves enough credit. No one could imagine that a group of guys could go out there, and the teams, we found there were 4 or 5 teams that were out there every summer making these circles in the UK, mostly guys, that these people were smart enough to come up with shapes that just happened to have the right frequency and the right shape and the structure to be resonantly active.
Wow.
And so you have 2 components. And I've been reading this in science for so long, it just kind of fit. One are quasi-crystals. These are so-called Penrose tilings. They're non-repeating crystalline patterns, but there's still a symmetry to it, even if they don't repeat exactly from one side to the other. Well, and this is the second most recent issue of Science magazine. Guess what they found in here?
Metamaterial.
Precisely. If you take 2 layers of graphene and rotate exactly 30 degrees, you get quasi-crystals.
It's amazing. And
it generates control. Buddy, they said it has electronic effects. You can create control over what are called relativistic fermions. Basically, a flat surface that just has this shape of a quasi-crystal can exert 4-dimensional control over a substance. 4-dimensional space and time at the same time. It's warping space and time from a quasi-crystal.
And that's why it's able to affect all the electronics.
Hello, what do you think is going on in these metamaterials that we've been hearing from various people at TTSA about how these UFOs control space-time? Is somebody figured this out before we did? We're getting on it. We're working on it, though. Is that these quasi-crystalline shapes have electronic properties, but it's more than just electromagnetic. It's actually relativistic. Talking Einsteinian relativistic changes to the space-time curvature from a 2-dimensional surface. Does that sound familiar?
Sounds very, very familiar. It's amazing how this conversation has started with how little we know about science and how much of a shock it's going to be on society as we learn these new things. And we're talking about just earlier, dark matter and dark energy, and that's 97% of the universe or something, and how little we know. And now we're finding out more and more about quasi-crystals and these metamaterials that bend space-time. And now, you've opened up my mind to crop circles. You've given me a
I got you, buddy. You see, you're a skeptic. Half an hour.
Because I'm also a big fan of the Quantum Research Institute with Clee Irwin and all those guys, and they believe that the universe is basically a quasi-crystal. And
oh, really?
Yeah, it's a E8 Lie supergroup quasi-crystal, and that's basically the universe. And it boils down to these and this is absolutely stunning. UFO experiencers and experiencers who have it happen a lot, they have all those same effects happen around them. So maybe, it's a way it ties all these different things together.
Thank you for saying that, buddy. That's also what occurred to me way back in the 90s. I said, wait a minute, this is what we hear around UFO experiencers. They're riding in the car, the radio shuts off, the engine shuts off.
I went to the hospital.
What is the connection? It's just an inert material. It's the shape. It allows what's called photonic multitasking with geometric phase. Geometric phase is when an electron just being around another electron gets the information from the other one without any contact whatsoever.
Resonance.
It's called the Aronoff-Bohm effect.
So that has nothing to do with entanglement. That's just a resonance thing. It's a separate thing than entanglement.
It's a weird function of quantum materials, is that they can pick up phase information from another photon or another electron if they move in a circle. A slow circular orbit of one electron allows it to pick up the phase with no contact with that electron. In fact, it can work with magnetics. If you go in with a classical EMF detector or any magnetometer, you will pick up no magnetic information whatsoever, no magnetic signal. But the other electron will pick it up because in the waveform, there is a slight possibility of the magnetic energy coming out there, even though classically there's nothing there. Do you understand that? It's one of the weirdest aspects of physics. It's called geometric phase. And it's connected to something, the Berry phase, it's connected to something called the Aronoff-Bohm effect. If you look at it from a multiverse point of view, it suggests that information can be transferred from one segment of a multiverse to another slice with no physical contact. It's just phase information. But the important point here is the Aronoff-Bohm effect showed us that classically, even if there's no signal there, the electron's picking up signal. It's just not in our classical physical space. It's at a quantum level. And it's based on circular orbits. And you've got these so-called crop circles doing the same thing. So here's what I'm saying. I'm not trying to overload you with new scientific information. But after researching this for a couple of decades, it was clear that there were a lot of things going on in crop circles.
Oh my gosh, there's so much going on. I mean, there's so many directions to go on this too. And it's like we've gone over an hour, and it's like I want to go 2 more hours. I want to pursue this on how, you know, it connects to remote viewing. I know that these phenomena happens around really successful remote viewers. This phenomenon happened around Ingo Swann. You know, I went to the hospital and it took 3 thermometers to work. You know, different people have these weird things that happen around them, especially when they're doing a lot of remote viewing or a lot of contact. How are they like a quasi-crystal? I can understand how a crop circle is like a quasi-crystal, but then how would a remote viewer be like a quasi-crystal? And all these different things.
It goes back, buddy, to the very beginning of our interview the previous time. We don't know what's going on. It's better if you just admit you don't know what's going on and let it come to you. Not try to force it into a framework that doesn't fit. For too long, we were trying to say, let's see, it can't be man-made. There's reasons why it can't be made. We were fighting the man-made idea. And then the skeptics would say, they're all man-made, and hence there's nothing to it. It's a hoax. Everyone go home. Nothing to look at here. But both sides were wrong. It was somewhere in the middle, right?
Yeah.
It does connect to the experiences of people who've been around UFOs, not to mention some of even stranger effects of UFOs, some of which can be unpleasant, even getting burned and so forth, which Hal Puthoff was talking about at the SSE lecture. So it shows us that we're in a universe where shape and frequency and pattern matter. And that somehow when you get the right shapes and the right precision, something that looks pretty like a quasi-crystal can be electronically active. And that suggests it's a porous universe, that information can transfer in a non-classical way from here to there without going through the intervening space. Here's what it suggests to me, buddy, and I'm not saying this is right, but obviously I'm always trying to wrap my mind around this every freaking day. How do all these things relate? If we live in a multiverse, there has to be some bleed through. And these crop circles act like devices that allow a bit of bleed through from the next parallel reality over, because they're acting like quasi-crystals. Around boom. The phase information's transferring from one space to another without going through the intervening space.
Wow.
So it's basically a universe that's filled with lots of layers of information and activity. Our physical senses only pick up a little bit about that, but as the remote viewers, Ingo Swann and Pat Price and all the others, Joe McMonagle showed us going back to the 70s, and even before that, a lot of the Russian researchers and the Russian psychics, I mean, going back 100 years to other famous psychics, right? There's the information, it does come from somewhere else in a non-local way. And it basically suggests that some of these non-local interactions are quite real. And sometimes they're enough to show up in a way that affects your batteries and cameras, or in UFO experiences to seem to alter time. It's not the universe we thought we were in. It's not the one we were brought up to believe. But I think the evidence is mounting from all sides that there's a lot going on that you don't register with your physical senses.
And we're on the verge of a new paradigm shift. We're on the verge of a massive new paradigm shift. And our senses aren't able to soak it all in yet, but it's coming. And I hate to cut you short, Dr. Hein.
Yeah.
But this is just such a deep topic. We can just keep going. And I think, you know, what you said just makes the most sense out of any kind of explanation of way to link them together. You know, I think every person who kind of gets involved in this and puts the pieces together says, like, there's a consciousness field or there's this thing, but you just did the mechanics. You explained how a non-entanglement way of communicating non-locally. For the first time I've ever heard that. I've never heard of that effect. And it totally makes sense about the circles and with the crop circles. So damn it, you did it with the crop circles. You convinced me on the crop circles. You've definitely opened my mind to a real scientific possibility of it, recreating a quasi-crystal, kind of a capacitor with metamaterial, acting as a metamaterial.
Yeah.
And that makes totally sense with the insulator. And wow, this has just been one of the most mind-blowing conversations I've had.
I appreciate that. being involved with crop circles has been one of the most gratifying things I've ever been involved with as a long-term project, because it was such a conundrum. It didn't fit into any box in your mind. Whatever you thought was wrong. It took a long time to realize it's more advancement. This science didn't exist back in 1996 or 7. This is all new stuff. We didn't have any of this. It's all new stuff. We had to develop it in the science realm. And this is a great thing about it, buddy. Science is not opposed to paranormal and alternative phenomena. They're all the same thing. It's just having an open mind enough to be willing to be wrong, to look at new evidence, to kind of willing to dwell in that uncertain place where you don't know for years, and let the information, let it tell you what's going on. Don't force your interpretation on it when it doesn't fit. I think that's the best thing you can learn from this is be patient. You know, it's what Leonardo da Vinci called Sufumoto, right? Sufumato, going into the mist of uncertainty and kind of letting something come out of there. We're not taught this in school anymore. We're taught to figure everything out, be precise. We've got the data, you know, it's all this data harvesting. We can just figure everything out if we have a big enough supercomputer. No, you're the supercomputer, but you need to be patient enough. And just to sum it up, RV taught me for 20 minutes, half an hour, quiet your mind and let the information come to you without interpreting it. So the credit has to go back to Courtney and RV and Lynn Buchanan, another person I studied RV with, who taught me the patience of not drawing conclusions, the value of not drawing conclusions during an RV session. When you apply that to your life, you'll see that really amazing things happen. You just be patient and let it happen.
That's wonderful advice. You know, letting that gestalt come to you. There's a great quote, I think it's from Nagarjuna, that says, if you still your mind like the surface of a lake, you can reflect the universe. And that's kind of like what you were saying, still your mind and the universe comes to you. And I think that's the same attitude we need to have about this reality of this paradigm shift that we're having now, that we shouldn't freak out. We should kind of still our mind and let this experience come to us. Let us find out what it is. Let's not freak out about it. The government, you know, we can take it. The society can take it, you know. Well, gosh, I really want to spend like 10 more conversations with you. One more just about this reality and what it is, the AV reality. I still think we can come back to crop circles and dive into that more. But wow, and I hate feeling like I had to rush you in this conversation.
That's right.
Your mind is so, and your experience is just so wonderful. And I just can't appreciate your time enough and encourage our viewers to watch you. And, you know, thank you so much for your time, Dr. Hine. This was really
thanks a lot, buddy. It was a lot of fun, and we'll do it again sometime.
I hope so. This was really, really fun. Thank you, Dr. Hine, so much.